this, I guess.
Hey, I think I see everyone here. Thanks for waiting. I'm glad it worked out. I'm Mark Gottlieb. I'm a vice president and literary agent at Trident Media Group in New York City. We represent a lot of authors to book publishers, many of them #1 New York Times bestselling authors, major award-winning authors, you name it. The agency has been around for a while. We actually lead the publishing industry both in terms of number of book deals, amount of money for book deals, going as far back as the year 2000, so that's year over year. So we're the first stop for a lot of authors, and as a result, publishers tend to think of us too, just given the fact that our business goes to the bottom line of most every publishing company. As a result, we get very good deals, very good publishing experiences for authors. Anyway, if you would like, there's more information on our website. You could take a look at tridentmediagroup.com. But I'm not here today to just tell you about myself and Trident. I want to also share with you all what it means to go on and find a literary agent and what that entails. Because, there's the internet, it's a big place. There's a lot of good information. There's a lot of bad or misinformation online. And so many things you could do wrong with very few things, I suppose, you can do right. So I suppose then it's easier to focus on the few things that, are easily done right in securing a literary agent. And I think, in simplifying the process, that can make it a lot easier on people. So it depends whether you're an author of maybe fiction or nonfiction or even children's books or graphic novels. It differs slightly depending on what you're writing and what you're looking to do. I think just to sort of simplify the process a bit, we could just focus on talking about mainly authors of fiction and nonfiction. But ideally, if you're an author of fiction, you've written the manuscript in full, and you have then put together what's called a query letter. And the reason why you need to write a full manuscript if you're an author of fiction is that fiction is very much so author-driven in terms of quality of writing and quality of storytelling. And by extension of that, an author becomes like a household name. Whereas, nonfiction differs slightly in that it's very much so idea-driven. So yes, of course, in nonfiction, you do as an author want to be an authority on your subject matter. Of course, it should be a well-written and engaging book. But it's very important who the author is in terms of a nonfiction book. Publishers of nonfiction tend to really want to see someone with a really strong built-in platform. It's very, very hard to convince publishers to take on an author or a book of nonfiction unless there's a very, very strong platform underneath it. We can talk, more about that later, but there are different ways of conceiving of or building a platform, or even kind of showing the semblance, of a platform. But because, again, nonfiction is very idea-driven, you can get away with showing, an agent and then potentially publishers, essentially, 1 to 2 sample chapters, maybe no more than 3 to 5 sample chapters, and a book proposal. And I can go into a little bit more of what that entails and what's in that. But you'd accompany that as well, like the same as with fiction, along with a query letter. And what a query letter is it's really an introduction to an author and their book. It's like a cover letter. You know, if you liken you know, the manuscript to the resume, the query letter is really a lot like the cover letter. And the type of things that go into a good query letter, you know, I like to think upfront in 1 to 2 sentences what the book is about. So sort of like in a hook kind of fashion, followed by a couple of body paragraphs detailing, you know, what the manuscript is about in terms of some of the exciting plot details of the book, you know, without too many spoilers. And then you sort of follow all of that with, you know, a quick 1 paragraph listing off relevant writing experiences, writing credentials, the background in writing, that sort of thing. You thank them, you close out the letter, you put your contact details in the signature line, and I think all of that really does make for a good query letter. It's concise, the information flows easily, it all fits on 1 page. You know, up front in the query letter, what you might have or how it might read, just to imagine it for a minute. For instance, it could say something like, "Dear so-and-so, I'm seeking, you know, representation for my debut novel titled blank for readers of blank and blank, in which," and then you give that kind of 1-line hook of what the book is about. Those 2 books you're comparing it to, we call them comp titles in the industry. That really is short for comparative or competitive book titles. And so what those mean is I'm holding my work in high esteem. You know, I'm not just presenting my work in a simple or easy way. I'm saying my book is like that bestseller over there or that award winner over there. And a good comp title is really a major best-selling book, and it should be published within the last 5 years. The reason being that publishing was a little different beyond that. Some would venture to say books may have even been written a little bit differently. And so I think it's important to, yes, hold your work in high esteem and use the comps as a means to search out, you know, agents and publishers. So let's say, okay, you have the material written, you have a query letter ready to go. How do you begin to think about, okay, who are the agents or what are the agencies I want to look at? How do I go about this kind of thing? There's so many different kinds of places I can search this out. I think one of the simplest ways to do this is there's a website called publishersmarketplace.com. Now, I don't work for them. I'm not a salesman for them, but they are basically like an online Rolodex for book publishing, akin to like an IMDb Pro or something like that. And basically what you're able to do is, and unfortunately this stuff is behind a paywall, so I believe it requires a subscription, but it's a pretty nominal subscription, and you only get the subscription for as long as you need it, basically. But you can search out, you know, agents or agencies in any given category. So for instance, if you search out, you know, top 10 agencies in the category of fiction for 6-figure plus deals, you know, you're going to see our agency in the first place. But then if you're trying to drill down into more specific information, like let's say you're looking at the top agencies in thrillers or women's fiction romance, or, you know, different subcategories of fiction, you can drill down into information like that. Clicking on the agency's name is going to show you some really interesting information. You're going to get a sense of their latest deals. You'll get a sense of the magnitude of those deals. So the publishers they've been working with, the amount of money for a lot of those deals, whether they were multi-book deals or not, if the agency was able to hold back rights from the publisher, things like that. The caliber of the clients or the authors they work with. You can go further into the information. You can look at the dates of those deals. How recently has the agency done a deal? So if you visit an agent's page and they haven't done a deal within the last year, that's a very bad sign. Like, that might mean they're not really in the business, you know, or they're not really working with a high level of frequency. You know, you can see different things like that. There are different indicators, but clicking on the agency or clicking on the agent's name will take you to a page with their contact details. a little bio of them. You can see some notable titles and, a list of deals. So that's kind of sort of one way I would search things out. Another way you could also sort of reverse engineer things is, in looking at those comp titles, you could plug those comp titles into a search and find out which agent, was the agent for whatever author or whatever book deal. Because you maybe feel in some way your book is similar to that work, or you aspire to that kind of work. That's another way to kind of search out agents. I've seen it kind of done that way too. So that's another kind of, magic bullet. But let's say, okay, you have these pieces ready to go. So you've got your query letter, you've got, the material you want to show, and you've put together a list of, top agencies or agents you want to go to. And I think you should really, start from the top and work your way down. I mean, aim high, is a thing. It's a good thing. And, from there, you begin the process of querying agents or agencies. And basically what that entails is I wouldn't just sort of begin by blasting out emails. No, instead, go to the websites of the agents and the agencies. You can read up on the individual agents on the company website. You can get a good sense of the agency by perusing the website, looking at the different services they have. So for instance, at our agency, we do a lot of work in the area of book to film and TV, and in audiobooks and foreign rights for getting books translated and published overseas. The agency and its clients have won many awards. There are a lot of #1 New York Times bestselling authors there, major award-winning authors. You can see the work of the agency and start to get a really good sense of them. And then in visiting the individual page of the agent, you'll see a bio of the agent, might give you a sense of what they're looking for there. The client list is another indicator. The titles they feature on their page as new and notable releases. And yes, their contact details are often there, but I would go further than that, in that you need to visit the submissions page of the agency to read their submission policies and see what the agency is asking of authors. Usually they want you to agree to certain terms and conditions and input a query letter into that form. Select an agent's name from the list. You would obviously know the agent's name from, the research you've done on the agency's website, or you want to query a certain agent at the agency. And then you'd submit the form. And in our case, what our website would do, so if you go to the Trident Media Group website, there's a submissions contact us page. You make a submission on that form, and the website will automatically generate a receipt that we received your email. It'll send that to you, and it'll tell you when we'll be in touch. Usually the agency will give some kind of indication, like, you'll hear from us in 30 to 60 days, whatever it is. In most cases, I would say, every agent is different, or every agency is different. I can only speak to the ways in which I work, or the ways in which I think, agents or agencies should work. I try to get back to people in as timely a manner as possible, especially if we request material. But usually I would say, if you haven't heard from the agent or the agency, within, that kind of 30 to 60 days, it may equate with either a lack of interest on the agent's or agency's part, or, something like that. So in a perfect world, yes, we would respond to each and every individual author and query letter. Obviously, the website generates a receipt to that effect. I read all of my query letters personally. I don't simply leave it to my assistant to do. That's just me. That's how I am. And if something's of interest, if something piques my interest, then what I'll do is I'll reach out to the author. I will, email them. I'll say, oh my gosh, this query letter sounds great. Please send, the manuscript my way. I'd love to read it. And if it's a good book, if it's well written, if it's the meat and potatoes of the story is good, the agent will then, offer representation to the author. And beyond that, if the author decides to go and work with the agent at the agency, then the agent will begin reaching out to publishers, and the publishing process kind of goes from there. I mean, after we were to secure a a publisher for an author and all of that. So that's really the starting point for a lot of authors. And, I think that helps to hopefully, simplify the process for a lot of people, because there's lots of information out there, but I think there are sometimes just sort of simple ways of going about doing these things. I want to look at some of the questions that people wrote here. There was a question before. Someone was interested in a conversation regarding hybrid publishing, pursuing traditional publishing after self-publishing, but I didn't see like a specific question related to that. One of the mods asked how everyone's enjoying the AWC so far, and that they're having a good time, and they're impressed with the event. That's great. And let's see if there's any other specific questions. Okay. Just mainly comments, I would say. But if people have thoughts or questions or anything they want to share, you can feel free to, put your questions into the chat, and I'm happy to speak to any of them. I see that some of the moderators shared some of the links to our website, and I have a blog with a lot of helpful information and resources for authors. But yes, I mean, people should feel free to jump in and just ask specific questions that, you have in mind. So one question I'm seeing here, it says, do you consider writers from outside the USA? Absolutely. I mean, we have such a range of authors and clients that we work with. Like, we work with authors from all over the world. I mean, the agency represents thousands of authors, tens of thousands of titles. We have a very, very deep backlist. Obviously, we've worked with people from all over the world, for that to be made possible. We've even done some literature in translation, so not just authors who are writing with, English as a first language. Another question I'm seeing here says, what word count are you looking for? Writing a magical realism book for 40,000 words, a first novel about a girl who grows up and realizes her mother didn't support her. I think, 40,000 words might be tough for some publishers, just given that normal book count range is about 80 to 120,000 words for adult fiction. Obviously for children's books, it's a lot shorter. Like, the ranges are lower. They tend to top out in young adult fiction around 70 to 80,000 words. In middle grade, it's around 45, sometimes up to 55,000 words. So 40,000 words would really characterize the book as basically a novella, because anything up to about 50,000 words is a novella. And the difficulty there for publishers is that, publishers price their books according to page count, or word count, I should say, ultimately page count. So a book that's shorter, right, will have a lower price tag, which means it's a smaller margin for profit for publishers. That makes it really hard for publishers. It starts to look like, the McDonald's effect, basically. It's like, you think to yourself, how does McDonald's make so much money? And it's because, even though the burgers are so cheap, well, they sell a lot of burgers. Whereas in publishing, really we want to be selling not necessarily the McDonald's burgers as much as like the Kobe beef burgers, right? Those come with a very high price tag, like a $30 burger, right? So you don't need to sell as many of them for your numbers to make sense. You could even end up with the opposite problem, believe it or not. Let's say your book was in excess of, 120,000 words. It's going to come with a higher price tag when the publisher publishes it, and it creates, a lot of challenges for the publisher in that higher costs of production, shipping, warehousing, and manufacturing, all those costs go up. It becomes more expensive to record as an audiobook. It's more studio time, longer time that, a sound engineer and an audio narrator needs to be in there. Translating a book that's longer, all of the costs of translation, well, they have the same costs that we do have here, but they all get compounded by the fact that in many languages, when you translate, you oftentimes end up easily adding a few words a sentence. So they have their cost of translation on top of everything. Oftentimes when we meet with foreign publishers, at the major book fairs like the London Book Fair, the Frankfurt Book Fair in Germany, when they were pitching a book to them to encourage the publisher to translate it and publish it overseas, one of their first questions of us is, well, how thick is it? How many words? How many pages? Because right away they're thinking of all their costs of translation. So my point is, there are artistic reasons for doing things, but publishing as also a business, there are business decisions, very objective business decisions that people make in terms of word count, which can help to lower the barrier to entry for a lot of authors. I want to see what some of the other questions are. What makes a query letter really catch your eye besides following all the query guidelines? So the important thing about a query letter is it's your storefront. It's everyone's first window into your world. It's a way to showcase who you are, what your story's about, and the quality of your writing. So it should be, in fact, a well-written query letter. If it's not, that could be an indication to the agent that, well, maybe the story's not going to be that good because it doesn't, the meat and potatoes of it in terms of the storytelling doesn't sound all that exciting. Or, oh, this query letter has terrible grammar and spelling, and it's not really grabbing my attention. So maybe the writing is like that too, even though the story sounds good. It's hard to kind of give people that benefit of the doubt because the experience of many agents and agencies is they're getting hundreds and hundreds of query letters. They don't have the time to read through all of them. Like in many cases, they're kind of skimming them, and something hopefully has to kind of jump out at them. Like there's one fun kind of example I like to use where I heard the story of there's this author who was trying to get a book about basketball published, and his query letter wasn't grabbing anyone's attention. And so he got so frustrated, he went to the store, he bought a bunch of basketballs and Sharpie markers. And can you guess what he did? He wrote out his query letter on a bunch of basketballs, mailed these basketballs out to, different agents and agencies he wanted to work with. And can you imagine being on the receiving end of this? You're getting a basketball in the mail. I'm not saying to go and do that. In fact, I would definitely not recommend you do that. But my point is, it's attention grabbing, and it's very in your face, having a basketball kind of thrown in your face. But, that's the spirit of it. That's kind of what you're going for with the query letter. You want to grab attention. And that's why, I say to put that hook and the comp titles up front in the query letter. It's a way to really grab people's attention right away, and it carries them through into the rest of the query letter. Let's see what other kinds of things. I laid out what makes for, a good query letter. Some people ask, do you put word count sometimes in query letters? I'm actually, probably one of the few people who will tell you, no, you don't need to put the word count in the query letter. And the reason being that I'm going to assume that in querying an agent or an agency, you already know what you're doing. You know what normal word count ranges are. You adhere to them. And if in the rare instance, I request a manuscript and, it's too short or too long, well, I'm the kind of person who's actually willing to work with the author to bring the manuscript to where it needs to be, to kind of help them into a more normal word count range if that's what, things are required, or, if that's what's required of the manuscript. But and this is just my opinion, but I think most agents, and maybe this is insider baseball, I don't know, but I think they look for the word count in the query letter because they can just see a number jump out at them and say to themselves, I'm going to delete and move to the next one, and I don't even have to think about it or read this letter because this person doesn't know what they're doing. And that's not fair, in my opinion. But of course, I mean, everyone can reserve their own judgment or whatever. But I mean, they they kind of do also have a point. Like, people should know what the normal word count ranges are, and should be doing them. But I'm the kind of person who, I'll give people the benefit of the doubt. I'll try and work with people. If the writing is good, the storytelling is good. Someone had asked, what tropes in the fantasy magical realism genre make your eyes glaze over? That's kind of a tricky thing, and not just in fantasy, but every genre really has their tropes, like, the alcoholic or drug addicted detective in mystery crime novels, whatever. That every genre has its tropes. The thing about tropes is, in many cases, they do actually need to exist in the book. It's like the wheel's been invented already. So it's about how you sort of reinvent the wheel, spin it in new and different ways, on its axis, on a helix, or whatever. The ways you kind of spin things differently. So I think kind of playing with the tropes and playing with our expectations and appealing to some of the readers who also look for tropes in writing, but they want to see how things are subverted. Like, a good example in fantasy is, well, oftentimes in fantasy, it's you have the kind of epic version of the hero's journey, right? And so in Game of Thrones, we have Ned Stark. And what's stark about Ned Stark, or surprising about Ned Stark, is, sorry to spoil it for whoever hasn't seen Game of Thrones, but George R. R. Martin kills him off really early in the story. And everyone's like, wait a minute, I thought he was the protagonist. I thought he was the hero. Like, I was getting ready to follow that guy on a journey like Luke Skywalker through Star Wars or whatever. And instead, what Martin did was he messed with everyone's expectations. And once viewers of the show or readers of the book saw that, they knew, okay, all bets are off. That means that could happen to any character I get attached to in the book. So I think it's good to, have some of the tropes there, but play with them, in new and different ways. Someone asked, what is the secret for the best query? Well, I mean, I feel like I gave a lot of them, but I think what query letters ultimately boil down to is the hook, that kind of elevator pitch, that one line. In the film and TV industry, they call it a log line. In publishing, we call it the hook. It's that elevator pitch, that one line that excites people into the story that they can latch on to, and they get it, they see it right away. And the comps are magical because, the comps point us to books that are working well in the industry, and it's a way to hold your work in high esteem. It's a way for agents and editors thinking to themselves, where does this book go on my list? Where might it go in a bookstore? How well might it do? It's a way for them to figure all of that out. So the comps, I say, and the hook too, are really those two things are the magic bullets in book publishing. Because let's say a publisher acquires your book, or they want to make an offer for your book. Well, they're going to try and run numbers of their own. They're going to use something that's called a profit and loss statement. A lot of books use, not just the book publishing industry uses this, a lot of businesses use this too. We call it a P&L sheet. Basically, they're going to plug in numbers for how they see that your book might do. And unless you've published before, they don't really have numbers to go on. A debut, the nice thing about a debut is a lot of publishers look at a debut and they think to themselves, well, there's a 50-50 chance with this author. Things could go really well or not. We don't know. We have to see. And so the comps, though, they're going to run numbers of their own. You are always, as an author, always going to be in a stronger position if you can suggest the comps to the publisher than to let the publisher come up with them. Because if you let the publisher come up with it, you have no idea what they're going to use. They could just be going purely by accuracy rather than trying to kind of elevate the comps. So if you use comps that are bestsellers, and the publisher really feels like, yes, this book is similar to those bestsellers, and they run run those numbers, in their P&L, there's a good chance they'll want to buy the book. So beyond the publisher buying the book, guess what question the book publisher gets asked by retailers like Barnes & Noble, bookstores that are going to carry the book. They're going to say the same thing to the publisher. What are the comps? Because the retailer, the bookstore is trying to figure out, where might this go in my bookstore? How well might it do? Will this move the same way other books have in that space? That's why that's really important. And the hook, that hook is really important, because go and read the jacket copy on the back of most any of your books at home, or go and read the product page, the book description page, on a retailer page like Amazon or the publisher's page. And what you're going to see there is oftentimes like a bold or italic line of text up front, which is that hook. It kind of can render out in different ways, like to use the Star Wars example, and I don't necessarily recommend doing this because it's kind of a very, very vague way of doing that. But to me anyway, the hook for Star Wars is in a galaxy far, far away, which is obviously kind of out there. But, I'm not saying to do that, but there are different ways of constructing or giving a hook. Or if you read a lot of book deal announcements, oftentimes those are the hooks. That was the way the book was pitched. Beyond that, the rest of the query letter becomes effectively like a good query letter will get reworked into an agent's pitch to publishers. And if the agent's pitch to publishers is good and the publishers buy the book, well, guess what they're going to do with the agent's pitch? They're then going to rework the agent's pitch into jacket copy on the back of a book, or that product description, on a retailer page. So the query letter, it's really important. It seems like an innocuous thing, the same way the hook or the comp titles do, but you see those carry through the publishing process and ultimately end up in the hands of the reader, who's looking at the back of a book and thinking to themselves, wow, this sounds really cool. They said it was like, Emily Henry and Abby Jimenez, and I love those authors. I think I'd like to read this. Or they read that bold line of text and it grabs them right away. So that's why I say these things are all magic bullets. That's the secret in the sauce, I think, for a good query letter. Someone said, what is the number one mistake aspiring authors make when querying? Well, probably the worst thing you could do is, and this has happened a couple times, but authors have told me about their book. They said, this sounds amazing. I'd love to read it. And they say, well, I haven't written it yet. Like, there's no words at all written down. It's just, I wanted to gauge your interest. And, so my only answer at that point can be like, all right, go write it and come back to me when it's written. Like, that won't really help anyone. You can't write ideas on a napkin unless you're already, a best-selling or major award-winning author. It doesn't really work that way. So that's the thing I've run into, which was a big mistake. But I feel like most people know, not to do that. Or, sometimes I get query letters that say, it's literally one line. It just says, this is a query letter. Will you read my manuscript? Like, that tells me absolutely nothing. Like, I don't even know where to begin to help someone like that. They need to know everything I just explained. So, that's obviously not good. So yeah, those are maybe a couple extreme cases that I've experienced. Someone asked, let us know your thoughts about the conference in this presentation. Okay, through the forum. Yep, you can share your thoughts. Let's see. What percentage of novels you represent are you able to sell, and has that become more difficult in recent years? That's hard to say. Publishing is not an exact science. There's a lot of artistry to what goes on, relationships and things like that, and luck and right timing and market forces. Very, very hard to predict. It's like we talked about yesterday. It's like trying to predict the weather. But I've performed nearly 300 book deals to date. Many of those, are multi-book deals, a lot of them six-figure plus deals, and for a range of authors. Some of them for bestsellers, some of them for award winners, and some of them for new or debut authors, or authors I hope go on to become, early career authors. So, those numbers are really good. The agency, has done thousands of book deals. I mean, none of this even includes the audiobook deals, the foreign deals, the film and TV deals. So that's my point. I think you should look at the in the pudding in terms of the output of the agency. That's, I think, how people will always know or get a better sense of the agent or the agency, and what their batting average is like. With that being said, yeah, things have changed in publishing quite a bit. I mean, the internet, Amazon Kindle, technology, COVID, the state of the economy, consolidation in publishing, AI, book bans. There's always going to be things changing publishing. I mean, when the Gutenberg, printing press was invented, people were freaking out about that. They were like, wow, now manuscripts aren't going to be written by hand anymore, by candlelight, by monks in, monasteries. Like, there's always going to be changes in technological things that come along. And, you have to rise to the occasion. You have to make the best of technological changes or market forces or things that are happening in the industry, and not be deterred or discouraged by them in any way. You just you keep going. That's the only thing. That's the only way. The only way is forward. There's nothing backwards, nothing behind you. Someone said, do you think the market is warming back up to dystopian novels? I think that, there's some dystopian fiction here and there in different ways. You're seeing it, play out in different genres. Wherever there's a master in a given genre, eventually someone's going to have to come along and fill their shoes. Climate fiction has been a big thing for a while. They're saying horror is coming back. So there's always an ebb and flow to things, and things change a bit. Sometimes some of the genres, kind of eke into different spaces, like dystopian. So I wouldn't be discouraged. I mean, people ultimately, everyone, I think, yes, it's good to be aware of the market and certain market forces at play, looking at the bestsellers list, seeing what's hitting there, visiting the websites of publishers, seeing what they're doing. But at the same time, beyond that, I mean, you have to write what you want to write, and what you feel most passionate about, because that's where the best storytelling will come through. And then you polish and hone it from there and try and connect it. And I believe every kind of book, every kind of story ultimately has its own audience there, just waiting for them for the right time. Nothing is ever written for naught. Sometimes books get published for certain reasons, and then they come back later. Like, famously, Stephen King used to write under the name Richard Bachman. He had published a bunch of books. People, didn't really know him all that well. But when he became the Stephen King we all know and love, the publisher and Stephen King went back, repackaged, republished those books under the name Stephen King. Almost no one was the wiser, and they all became like, beloved horror classics of Stephen King. So you could be surprised. Someone said, I don't know if you saw this. Someone asked a question. What part of the process do you find new authors tend to spend the most time in? Well, I think there's a tendency to want to write and revise and revise and revise and revise. And it is good to polish your work. Like, if you look at how many times a sword is polished, like a katana, like, there are multiple steps in the process, and dozens of steps in the process, and different people who do all those different kinds of polishings, to kind of really hone the sharpness, like, of a katana. And yeah, you could do that with a manuscript, but you could also do that indefinitely. There, for instance, Tennessee Williams was famously revising his plays as they were being performed on Broadway, and winning Tony Awards on top of it. Like, that's a really obsessive trait, after a certain point. So I think it's good for authors to obviously not just write the don't just write the manuscript and then just simply send it off. Write the manuscript, spend time with it, read it aloud back to yourself, edit it, have it read back to you, and try to edit it in different places. Like people work with, sometimes they call them beta readers or some kind of workshop. I say take the manuscript as far as you can. And when you feel ready or it's polished enough, bring it to an agent at an agency. But yeah, I think that's a lot of time spent for new authors. They tend to spend a lot of time on that, and they also kind of obsess over a lot of the details because they feel like there's a lot of information to take in. Whereas if you really boil it down, it's very simple. It's very simple information. It's have a good story that's well written. It's great if you have writing experience and writing credentials, but so what if you don't? Put it into a knockout query letter. Query the best agencies. You can know them from going on Publishers Marketplace and looking at the work of the agency. And the rest will kind of flow from there. Someone said, I have a brand that is multi-genre, and I was thinking of looking for an agent for my romance novels, which is going to be under my other pen name. Would an agent prefer I build another brand first? That depends. I suppose everyone's different. I work across a number of different spaces because I have some clients that write in different genres of fiction and nonfiction, even within children's books and graphic novels. So I try to service the needs of every kind of client. I can see someone wanting to kind of separately silo certain things if, let's say, on the one hand, you're writing children's books, but on the other hand, you want to write kind of women's fiction romance novels. Usually, the PTA wants those things really far apart. Or let's say you've established yourself as a brand name author in one place, and you're wanting to try something new and different, but the publisher kind of views it in a risky way and they don't want it to hurt your sales track record. One way to kind of experiment with it is, try it under a different name or pen name. It's a conversation to have within an agent and a publisher, basically. Someone asked, is 83,000 words too many for a middle grade YA crossover fantasy? I'm also having a bad time finding comps. Well, it depends on the age of the characters if you want to first determine whether it's middle grade or young adult. And that's an important thing to do because children's books are very much so about how things can fit into a certain space. And because the parents, the teachers, the librarians do mainly the book buying, less so the kids. So they want to make sure the book is age appropriate. And the way to find out which age the book is intended for, middle grade is typically ages 8 to 12. So if your protagonists or your main characters are mostly within that age range, chances are you have a middle grade novel. And if your characters are, your primary characters are somewhere in the age range of 13 to 17, you have a YA book on your hand. If it's a young adult book, having it top out around 83,000 words is fine. Middle grade, that would be very long for a middle grade novel, although given that it's fantasy, there tends to be a lot of world building, a lot of big epic journeys that go on. Those books tend to be massive tomes. So it's not surprising to go, a little bit on the higher end or even above, maybe 10,000 words or so around a word count range. But basically, I think the first thing to do is determine, is it middle grade, is it young adult? And then to see where the word count fits in all of that. Maybe more of a comment than a question, but someone says, this sucks, very competitive industry, LOL. Well, I mean, yes and no. I mean, everyone's saving grace is just simply, at the end of the day, boil it all down to one thing: good writing and storytelling. Good writing and storytelling. That will always save the day, no matter what. That is all you need. That is the the one thing you can always fall back on. And the rest is kind of the bells and whistles, you know? It's, if you do that one part, you know, you do that part right, and you get an agent, you know, it's like the rest will take care of itself almost. You know, obviously there's more, you know, before, in between, and thereafter, but there is, yes, a lot to give thought to, and you know, knowledge is power, right? So you know more, and then you know you have more at your fingertips, more within your abilities. Someone said, "Isn't that the point of a literary agent? I feel like the agent isn't doing 90% of the marketing; they are just shills." I don't know what shills means, but um, mm, shills. Maybe someone can let me know. But, or chilling, or um, most of the marketing really takes place um, at a few different levels. So once we find a publisher for a client, you know, and I'm again only speaking to my abilities and the abilities of the agency where I work, or how I think an agent or agency should work. And this is not to speak pejoratively, but I find that most other agents or agencies tend to just sort of check out after a book deal is done. And they say, well, I'll see you when it's time for the next book deal. Whereas I feel like, no, that's not right. We have a vested interest in the success of every author and their book. And so it's really, really important that, you know, the book, any publication is successful, because that's going to determine the success of the next book. So once we find a publisher, we ask the publisher for a copy of their marketing and publicity plans so we can comment and improve upon those plans. You know, all in the spirit of success, we make certain recommendations and we try to hold the publisher to task. We see what the agency can be doing. For instance, we have a digital media and marketing department that helps to market and promote our authors in the digital sphere. They interface with a publisher and their marketing publicity department to do some of those same recommendations and follow through on other items. Like, we do social media audits for clients to find out, are their accounts really strong? Where can we strengthen their online presence? That kind of thing. We make custom creative or ad cards for clients, things like that. Things you'd be very hard pressed to find at most other agencies. And then we work with the client more directly to say, you know, what can the client be bringing to the table? How can we help support them? Sometimes that's a matter of getting an outside publicist on it, which is obviously an expensive thing, but some people can afford it or pay for it out of a book advance, or sometimes publishers will hire an outside publicist. So I wouldn't say all the burden is put on the author. What I would say is the author is very much so in the pilot seat or in the driver's seat, and the agent at the agency is very much so the co-pilot or in the passenger seat next to the author. And they should be there to, you know, help support the process, that sort of thing. Someone said, if we previously, and by the way, if we are over time, someone's got to let me know, but someone said, if we have previously self-published a book, should we include that in a query letter for a different genre? For example, I self-published a self-help book, but now I'm querying middle-grade historical fiction. I guess it can't hurt to mention, you know, it's not as pertinent because it's a very different genre. You know, it's probably something you could put in the author bio, but it's not really necessary to mention up front, although at a certain point it's got to be discussed, you know, between the agent and the client potentially, you know, whether that be on the wedding night or just sometime ahead of approaching publishers. Someone said, when an author successfully pitched you, how much of that story they've crafted and how much of that is the confidence in which they've presented the pitch? That's a good question, because sometimes I read a query letter and I think to myself, there's got to be something more to this. And then even though the query letter is not fully doing it for me, and I find more to the manuscript. And other times, sometimes people are great about writing their pitch or their query letter, and then the manuscript ends up disappointing. Not everyone will give the benefit of the doubt, so you got to, of course, have a great query letter, a great manuscript, but at the same time, I understand there's some people who they struggle with the query letter, and yet somehow, that meat and potatoes in the story sounds good, or there's something to the writer and their credentials, or the comp seems spot on, and that just sort of convinces me to request the manuscript anyways, and sometimes I've been pleasantly surprised. Someone said, I see a lot of clients are well known prior to being repped. A lot of my clients are well known prior to being repped. Do you have clients who are first-time authors who don't have a writing background? Yeah, I mean, that's definitely happened too. It's a mixture of things. For instance, I have a client who wrote a book called Witches Be Crazy. It's like a comedic fantasy. And he, it was a really funny book, really well written. We sold it to a publisher. And I asked him, I said, I got to know, like, who are you? Where'd you learn to write? He said, well, I'm in high school and I manage a megaplex, movie theater. And I thought to myself, wait, you're not even in college yet? Like, you haven't really studied writing or anything? And then I realized this guy, if he manages a movie theater, he gets to watch all the free movies he wants all day long, and probably gets to watch a lot of movies on repeat. And what that told me right away is he probably knows storytelling from that. It's the same way that Quentin Tarantino used to go and watch a lot of films and study them. He was changing film in the projector room a lot, and so he was watching a ton of movies. Someone said there was a sudden rise in literary agents playing basketball. Oh gosh. Well, we'll see. Someone said publishing is marketing is the publisher's job in partnership with the author, not the lit agents. The lit agent's job is to represent the author's best interests, in contracts and career development. Yep, that's all true. I think, but at the same time, I think whatever the agent or agency can bring to the table, to your point about supporting the author's best interests, that's absolutely true. Someone said, how much of the marketing is an author expected to take on for their novel? Well, I feel like I kind of spoke to that before a little bit, but really what it all comes down to is the ship will always go faster, the more hands on deck that there are. So the tricky thing about being an author is once you've found a publisher and you're going through the publishing process, it comes time to market a book. You're concurrently marketing a book, promoting a book, while you are also, thinking of the next idea, writing the next book. So you're always going to kind of be working on those parallel tracks. And the more you can bring to the table, and the same way that we feel the more a publisher and agency can bring to the table, the better, because you never know, where sometimes you drop a pebble in a pond, you think it's just ripples, but there could be a really big fish living under the pond. You never know. You could be surprised. Someone said your agent is your middleman for publishers. It's not all up to them. You as the author have a huge role in drumming up interest for your book. Again, that's true. That's a part of it. I think authors are very, very central to the process, just simply by the nature of the fact that, when you go on the Late Show, people aren't going to want to hear from your agent. They're not going to want to hear from your editor. They're most likely going to want to hear from you as the author. Okay, someone gave word count on fantasy. If you're underneath the normal word count range, that's fine. If you go 5 or 10,000 words outside of 80 or 120,000 words, you're fine. Have you had authors secure a film deal based off of an unpublished book and taken it on after? In very, very rare instances. But nowadays, given how tough things are in the film and TV industry, and the fact that most of what they're making nowadays is already adapted from books and plays and podcasts and things like that, they really need something to hang their hat on. And so it's actually easier to get a book published than it is to get a movie made. But if you get a book published and it becomes a success, it's very, very easy to convince publishers. I had a client who he began with a screenplay. He was trying to get it made into a movie. I said, turn it into a book. He turned it into a book. We sold it, sold over 500,000 copies. And now, you know, the film and TV industry is you know, all over it. Someone said a lit agent is more like a business partner. If marketing plan is really important, let your agent know so they can negotiate that with the publisher when you get a contract. Usually the publishers are very reticent to make contractual terms out of the marketing plans. They might bring a marketing person onto a phone call or tell you how they might market a book. It's very hard to get them to put it in writing and email. Almost impossible to get them to put it into a contract unless you're some kind of mega best-selling author. More likely, a good agent will ask the publisher for their marketing and publicity plans and work with the client and the publisher on them. Because some of these plans I've seen are kind of cookie cutter at best. Like I had an instance where a publisher accidentally sent me another author's marketing plans, believe it or not. And then 5 minutes later, I get an email that says, oops. And then I get a different email with the same marketing plans, but my client's name on it. And I know, okay, these are the same plans. This is what they're showing everyone. So that's why you can't leave it up to chance. And even if they show you plans, it doesn't mean they're gonna act on those plans or that they really know these people or those venues or that any of that will actually happen. So what we try to do is set basically every 2-3 weeks a phone call with the publisher to follow up on their publishing process and the marketing plans to kind of see how things are going. Someone says should have expected it because Sean Bean dies in 90% of what he's in it. Let's see. What do you think about prologues? I'm not opposed to prologues. Sometimes I think they're a great lead into a book. I tend to think short prologues are better. I'm like really a big fan of like very, very short prologues, like a paragraph or a page. But like when a prologue starts to feel like a chapter, it doesn't really feel like a prologue anymore. I think it should be a really critical or crucial moment in a book or an exciting way to pull someone into the book. Oh, hey Vic, he says, are you planning to do any in-person writing workshops in the future? So yeah, I stop by this website a lot, writingworkshops.com, where it's pinned on, I think, my Facebook and Twitter page, maybe my LinkedIn too, but I do stop by writingworkshops.com quite a bit. I've got a page there with different courses where like once a month I do a workshop on a different topic or a seminar on a different topic. They have some destination writing retreats too, which are a lot of fun. So yeah, I just do that because it helps. I mean, people, they learn more about publishing. It kind of demystifies the process, and I think people ultimately start to feel a lot more lighthearted and easier about it when they feel like empowered. They have like a lot of knowledge under their belt. So yeah, someone said, nice question. Or what if I don't have good comps? Well, there's a good way to search out comps. I talk about it in one of those workshops I do, but Amazon's a great tool, Goodreads, Google, obviously looking at bestsellers lists and what books publishers are featuring on their pages as new releases and things. But I tend to go to the Amazon Top 100 for print, and I look at the top 100, and then sometimes I try not to drill down too far, but I'll go into some of the subcategories like literature and fiction or romance or science fiction fantasy and see what's hitting in the top 100 there. There's a way to sample those books for free on Amazon. You obviously read the description too. It's a good comp if it was published in the last 5 years. Maybe it has thousands of reviews or it says New York Times bestseller or Booker Prize winning, whatever. All of those give good indications. And then sometimes Amazon, through their algorithms, they say customers who bought this also bought, and you got to be careful with that because sometimes that's sponsored content. But sometimes through their recommendations or what customers also bought, you find good stuff. That's another way. What else? Someone said how to make an agent head desk. Well, I haven't written it yet. Okay. Laugh aloud. Wow. The audacity to query an agent without a completed manuscript. Someone face palmed. Well, yeah, I mean, the one time that worked was it was someone who was already a New York Times bestselling author. They came to my office in New York. We met. We had never met in person before. She started telling me a premise for a story. I said, this is incredible. I would love to read it. She's like, well, this is just how it's playing out in my mind. And I said, the way your mind works is incredible. Like, you have to write this. She said, really? Because that's what I needed to hear. Like, now I feel like I have the wind in my sails to go and do it. She went, she wrote it. We ended up selling it. It was on a sample. That I normally don't recommend. That's very, very hard to do. You, especially as a debut, you got to write it on the full manuscript. But we sold it off a sample, and yeah, so she has a publisher for that. Someone said, if you like some of the manuscript but not the rest, do you ask the author to rewrite it to better standards, or do you give it to editors and have them change parts of the story? Every author, every book is different, so the needs of every author and book are different. But if the manuscript needs work, we try to work with the client to make specific recommendations. And if the client doesn't want it or doesn't want to do that, that's fine. You know, we see what publishers then want to say or do, along a submission. And, some editing will take place later on at the publishing house. So there's always that too. The possibility of that anyway. But yeah, we work with clients, wherever they feel our help is wanted or needed by us. Let's see, someone said facts. Okay, question. What kind of consideration do traditional agencies give to authors with 10 to 25 self-published books? Is the threshold where indie authors self-publish themselves out of a chance to get a traditional deal? That's a tricky thing. I would say any self-publishing author who has sold in excess of, I'd say, 5, 10, maybe 15,000 copies of any one given book, and ideally their most recently published book, like their last book or two, that's going to pique the interest of most agencies and in turn publishers. But if you've done a string of self-publishing and the sales numbers are very low, it's going to be very, very hard to convince an agency or a publisher, because then the sales track record begins to tell another story. And to my mind, it's very unfair, because that kind of thing, because there's a glut material in the self-publishing space. It's a race to the bottom in terms of how authors publish those books, and you got to be like an expert to stand out, to market and promote yourself in that space. In the early days of self-publishing, it was like upload a book to a server and you were done, and the book would do the rest of its thing. Now it's so hard, and people don't always want to give the benefit of the doubt. Although I had a client where his self-publishing numbers weren't great, but the premise of the book was nice. I said, look, put the skeletons back into the closet. Let's just remove the self-published edition or not mention it. We sold it to Penguin Books. We optioned it to Ron Howard's production company. And the author was very happy. But that was the early days of self-publishing, when it was easier to remove a title from sale online. Now, once you self-publish, it's like, and you remove it from sale, it's like kind of getting a tattoo removed. You can tell there was a tattoo there. There's still a little bit of scarring, even though the tattoo is gone. So it's a little bit harder to do, but there's sometimes ways around that. Write what you want because you're the one that's going to have to reread it 50 times. Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of times to reread it. Someone said, thanks for spending so much time. Sure. Oh, there's just a little bit of time left. We are probably over the amount of time. So rather than get to all these questions here, maybe we will jump off. I mean, I see there's stuff about illustrated children's books, and should you approach a query layer differently? Sometimes they include the full script. Someone said, how are the publishing houses considering the trend of putting more and more adulty scenes in YA? Does there need to be a new rating system? I don't know. Partially, I feel like we got to give kids more credit. And in another sense, new adult has come back into vogue, and it's a space that sits kind of between YA and adult romance. It's a little kind of like smuttier YA. Someone said, do you think the popularity of YA style of books with adulty themes have to do with the decrease of literacy levels? I think a lot of it is actually owed to TikTok, oddly enough, and the age that TikTok most appeals to, believe it or not. For instance, TikTok, the company that owns them, ByteDance, opened a publishing arm called Eighth Note Press. They are very focused on publishing in the new adult space, in YA, but in large part because they see the data. They have access to the entire back room of data. All right, if people need to run or jump to the next presentation, I understand, because I saw a message that there were only 2 minutes left. Okay, so maybe we will just sort of cut out there, but I thank you all for coming by, and I hope you enjoyed, and that, you know, many of your questions hopefully were answered, and that, you know, you all have good, happy, highly successful publishing experiences going forward, that you all go on to find, you know, the agency of your dreams and the publisher of your dreams, and reach as wide an audience as possible. So yes, of course, yes, good food for thought. All right, thanks everyone. Take good care and be well.